As the New York Times notes, the biggest monthly increase in the consumer price index since the peak of the post-pandemic inflation crisis in June of 2022. Vice President J.D. Vance is headed to Pakistan to try to help Donald Trump find a way out of the war he started and that J.D. Vance was opposed to launching. Two White House officials tell MS Now that Vance has privately voiced opposition to the war for weeks to Donald Trump and top White House aides. The balancing act of publicly supporting Trump's military campaign while privately expressing reservations has left some in Vance's inner circle on edge. Vance's national security team is extremely wary, the official said. So many people are afraid of being on the outs. Here's what J.D. Vance said today.
If the Iranians are willing to negotiate in good faith, we're certainly willing to extend the open hand. If they're going to try to play us, then they're going to find that the negotiating team is not that receptive. So we're going to try to have a positive negotiation. The president has gave us some pretty clear guidelines, and we're going to see.
The Iranian delegation arrived in Pakistan today, according to Iranian state media. And as talks are set to begin, Iran is making a new demand for the negotiations. The New York Times reports the Speaker of the Iranian parliament added the new requirement, the release of Iran's blocked assets, in a post on X, saying it, quote, must be fulfilled before negotiations begin. The other precondition he listed was that Lebanon must be included in the truce. Iran is still refusing to fully open the Strait of Hormuz in retaliation for Israel refusing to stop its attacks in Lebanon that have killed more than 300 people in the last 3 days. The New York Times reports that only 2 ships went through the Strait of Hormuz on Friday, the lowest number since Iran agreed to a ceasefire. Hundreds of other ships are waiting on either side of the strait, still reluctant to attempt to navigate it after weeks of war. The Strait of Hormuz was always a choke point for Iran. Donald Trump was warned that Iran could close it if attacked. But only Donald Trump was dumb enough to do it. And the New Yorker points out that not only has Iran retained control of the strait, quote, it now asserts the right to charge millions of dollars in tolls to ships that wish to pass, a new status quo sanctioned by Trump that will enrich and entrench the theocratic government he started out the war wanting to topple. Well done, Donald. In a phone interview today, Donald Trump told the New York Post that he's ready to resume attacks on Iran if talks fail. Quote, we have a reset going. We're loading up the ships with the best ammunition, the best weapons ever made, even at a higher level than we use to do a complete decimation. And if we don't have a deal, we will be using them, and we will be using them very effectively. And he posted on social media, and I'm quoting, the Iranians don't seem to realize they have no cards other than a short-term extortion of the world by using international waterways. The only reason they are alive today is to negotiate. But what is Donald Trump focused on today? Building paeans to himself. From his $400 million illegal ballroom, now blocked by a federal judge, that's left a gaping hole on the White House grounds. You can see it there. To the construction of a new 250-foot arch that he wants to build between the Lincoln Memorial and Arlington National Cemetery. The White House has not revealed how much that would cost. So while Donald Trump is putting U.S. troops in danger for a war he's losing and crippling the global economy, he's focused on spending more of the American taxpayers' money on gaudy shrines to himself. Donald Trump said this today as he sent his vice president to try to clean up his mess.
We're going to open up the Gulf with or without him, but that'll be open. We're going to be, or the Strait as they call it, and I think it's going to go pretty quickly. And if it doesn't, we'll be able to finish it off one way or the other. It's going well.
What's your backup plan if there's no deal opens?
You don't need a backup plan.
What on earth is he talking about? Nobody believes him. Trump blusters, but the Strait of Hormuz has been closed for more than a month. How many times has Trump demanded the strait be opened immediately? No one is confused about who won this game of chicken. Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Eugene Vindman of Virginia. He is a member of the Armed Services Committee and a retired Army colonel. Congressman Vindman, thank you very much for coming to The Last Word. In a normal administration, we'd be asking about the negotiations. In this administration, I'm just going to ask, what's your understanding of where we are in Iran, and what is Trump trying to get out of these talks in Pakistan?
Well, Jonathan, thank you for having me tonight. Look, the answer is simple. We're in a bad position, and Donald Trump is trying to get himself out of a pickle. He started this war of choice about 45 days ago without a real plan. He thought that a bombing campaign would be sufficient to bring the Iranians to their knees, for the Iranian population to rise up. It was based on hope, and all of that has failed. Now here we are in a war where the ceasefire proposal starts with the Iranian proposal, 10-point plan, lifting sanctions. They get to control the Strait of Hormuz, charge fees for the transit. Oh, by the way, we've lifted sanctions on their oil, and the Russians also have sanctions relief. So it's a really bad position for the United States to start negotiating from. And the only thing worse than this ceasefire is, frankly, the war continuing under the management of this president and this administration. I mean, Pete Hegseth has no idea what he's doing, and neither does Donald Trump. And I think we're in significant trouble here.
So then what do you think that means for the Strait of Hormuz? What happens? Can that genie be put back in the bottle?
Well, it's going to be extremely difficult. The United States, unfortunately, Donald Trump dragged this country into a war without support from allies. He's attempting to badger allies after the fact. He's allowing the Iranians to establish a new normal by controlling the strait. And oh, by the way, they recognize that they're in a strong negotiating position. That is why they're adding additional preconditions, as you described at the beginning. Their assets being released, and Lebanon strikes by Israel being stopped. That's the other thing here, is that Israel is basically an independent actor here. We started the war somewhat aligned on our interests, but never with unified command, never with unified goals. And here they are diverging pretty dramatically, and the position is really bad. I have, frankly, low expectations for the negotiations that are about to start in Pakistan.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about this arch President Trump is focused on building when his war is costing billions of dollars, and it will change the skyline in your state. Your thoughts on this proposed 250-foot arch?
Well, it's wasteful. I mean, first of all, we wasted $50 billion on a war where we could use that money to fund healthcare, to fund education, to fund schools, to fund infrastructure. And Donald Trump is talking about building an arch. You know what? He's currently in Charlottesville, Virginia, at a fundraiser for $1 million a person for MAGA Inc. Well, guess what? Virginia, we have a redistricting referendum, 11 days to go. Early voting has started. A bunch of early voting locations open up tomorrow. And we have an opportunity. If you don't like the war in Iran, vote yes on the referendum. If you don't like paying more for gas, vote yes on the referendum. If you don't like the arch, certainly vote yes on the referendum. This is an opportunity to dump Trump and vote yes on the referendum.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was just about to ask you about the referendum. Clearly, some voters are still uncomfortable with redistricting. A poll that came out showed that 44% said that they would not vote for the redistricting referendum in Virginia. What would you say to them about the choice in this moment?
Yeah, it's simple. The president started a redistricting war around the country. He called up his minions in places like Missouri and Texas, where they made backroom deals. Legislators decided to flip them out because the president recognized he could not win this midterm election, given how unpopular his policies are. He's raised tariffs. He's increased cost of gas. There's a direct line from his actions and what he's doing, this war in Iran, to how much people are paying at the pump. And so what he was elected to do was to control costs, and he's actually skyrocketing costs. And there's an opportunity, this is a direct opportunity for Virginians to take action to control this president. If you don't like the direction this country is going in, this referendum is for you to go out and vote to dump Trump, get control of the president when the midterms are won by Democrats, and change the direction of this country.
Congressman Eugene Vindman of Virginia, thank you very much for coming to The Last Word. We want to take you back to the Pacific Ocean, where the 4 Artemis II astronauts, Koch, Glover, Hansen, and Wiseman, are now on board the U.S. Navy's USS John P. Murtha. You can see astronaut Christina Koch walking off the helicopter. They will now undergo standard post-mission medical evaluations, and we'll bring you the latest updates as we have them. And coming up, have America's allies have they had enough of appeasing Donald Trump? That's next. It appears our NATO allies are fed up with Donald Trump. Just listen to what British Prime Minister Keir Starmer told ITV News yesterday.
I'm fed up with the fact that families across the country see their bills go up and down on energy, businesses' bills go up and down on energy because of the actions of Putin or Trump across the world.
Prior to Donald Trump, it was unthinkable that the Prime Minister of America's closest ally would liken the actions of the American president to that of an invading dictator. But here we are. That comment by the British Prime Minister came a day after Donald Trump fired off this incoherent, all caps social media post, which I will not read screaming because that's what all caps means. NATO wasn't there when we needed them, and they won't be there if we need them again. Remember Greenland, that big, poorly run piece of ice? The Wall Street Journal is also reporting the White House is considering a plan to punish some members of the NATO alliance that President Trump thinks were unhelpful to the U.S. and Israel during the war. That's according to administration officials. Animosity towards Donald Trump seems to be growing amongst NATO leaders. The New York Times reported on these blunt words from French President Emmanuel Macron last week. Quote, "When we're serious, we don't say every day the opposite of what we said the day before," Mr. Macron told reporters in response to a question about Mr. Trump's threat to continue the war and bomb Iran intensively. And maybe one shouldn't speak every day. Mr. Macron, speaking of Mr. Trump's verbal attacks against NATO, also said, quote, "If you create doubt every day about your commitment, you hollow it out." Serge Sherman, former New York Times Moscow bureau chief, says that Europe is done appeasing Trump. In an opinion piece for the New York Times, he writes, "It sounded like a grown-up speaking down to an obstreperous child, and that was probably what the French president intended." Mr. Macron is one of the few European leaders who have dealt with Mr. Trump almost from the first day of his first term. His transition from initial deference and feigned friendship to very public rebuke reflects the degree to which respect for the American president has fallen among European leaders and their publics. Mr. Trump's war on Iran, about which NATO allies were not consulted and in which they subsequently declined to participate, has made clear that Europeans no longer defer to Mr. Trump as the de facto leader of the free world. Joining us now, Michael McFaul, who served as the U.S. ambassador to Russia under President Obama. He is an MS Now international affairs analyst. Ambassador McFaul, as always, thank you for coming to The Last Word. Oh, I forgot. He is the author of Autocrats versus Democrats, China, Russia, America, and the New Global Disorder. Apologies, Ambassador. But
no apologies needed. Thanks.
Let me read more from Serge's reaction to Donald Trump's social media post this week. And I'm quoting here. At least there was no new talk of leaving NATO for now. The shouty missive elicited no major pushback from foreign leaders. This was Mr. Trump being Mr. Trump. Tedious, repetitive, vulgar. He is still dangerous, and he could still unleash terror on the people of Iran should the ceasefire collapse. But his uppercase blasts, chest-thumping rants, and coarse insults are more likely now to draw a Gaelic shrug. So, Ambassador McFaul, do you agree? Are our European allies done with Donald Trump's antics?
Well, they're most certainly fed up. That's a good word that the prime minister used. They're exhausted by it. He's all over the place. One day he wants their help. The next day he says NATO can't do anything. And I think it's important to remember how he started his second term. He started his second term by threatening to invade one of the NATO allies, Denmark, to take Greenland. He started his second term by joking that one of our other allies, Canada, should become the 51st state. Then he imposed tariffs on our allies in a completely irrational way. Then he cut assistance to Ukraine to zero, so our Ukrainian allies have to help the Ukrainians themselves. And then after all that, he went on a war of choice to Iran and was then disappointed that those same people that he did all those things I just described to, I could have described many more insults and real policy implications, that they didn't come to his aid. So of course they're frustrated, but they face a dilemma because they want NATO to endure. They want NATO to exist beyond the Trump presidency. And so in one breath, you see certain leaders talking the way you just quoted them. But then when the General Secretary of NATO was here just a couple days, Mr. Rutte, he spoke in a very different way. He spoke in a kind of appeasement way. Mr. Trump is such a great man. And I think there's a division among European leaders about how to preserve what they have before it completely falls apart.
Well, on NATO, is there a scenario where Donald Trump actually tries to withdraw the United States from NATO? I mean, my question is, can he? And if he does, what kind of long-term effect would that have?
Well, first of all, before I get to that, I want to make sure everybody understands what a catastrophic mistake that would be for American national interests, for us. Keeping the peace in Europe serves our interests. We don't want to be dragged into World War III there like we were before. It is one of our biggest trading partners. And third, it unites the free world. These are American interests. And the thing that Trump doesn't get about NATO, it's a defensive alliance. I want everybody to go read the treaty. It says an attack on one is an attack on all, not a coalition of the willing to go fight other people's wars. NATO didn't fight in Vietnam with us. NATO didn't fight with the French in Algeria. They didn't fight with the Portuguese in Angola and Mozambique. Even when the UK, the British were attacked in the Falklands War, NATO collectively didn't go fight that war. The only time they fought together was when we were attacked on September 11th. That's what it's for. Now, to your question, he could try. I mean, there's legalities and there was passed. And ironically, Senator Rubio was one of the sponsors of the legislation to say that presidents should not be allowed to withdraw. But I worry about something more subtle, moving troops out, stop with intelligence sharing, this gradual grudgery that's happening, this tit for tat stuff. And so it could be 3 years from now that maybe formally NATO will exist, but practically it won't because trust has been so broken by this president.
Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and many of his MAGA allies have put their support behind Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban as a model for reshaping Europe. Let me read something that Bloomberg reports. If polls prove correct, Sunday's election in Hungary will end his 16 years of uninterrupted power after the country grew weary of unfulfilled economic promises and the cost of living crises he has failed to halt. So what would an Orban defeat mean for Europe and for MAGA?
Well, first, the fact that we and the Vice President of the United States of America is campaigning for Viktor Orban, who is a close friend and dare I say, maybe even ally of Vladimir Putin, is just crazy. And it drives the Europeans crazy. When we do this, is blatant interference in their elections. Now, I don't think it's going to work. I think the polls are pretty clear. But just think about that for a moment. You know, my book's called Autocrats versus Democrats. Most of it was written before President Trump's second term. Some days, the Europeans, and me included, I'm not sure which side President Trump is on in that divide in the world. But if Orban falls, if the opposition leader Magyar wins, this will be democratic renewal in Hungary. It will also lead to a more coherent European Union, and that is good for the world. And I hope President Trump will understand that it's good for America as well.
Well, as the saying goes, hope springs eternal. Ambassador Michael McFaul, thank you, as always, for coming to The Last Word. Coming up, Donald Trump may not have to answer to voters, but his Republican House members sure do. Voters in every single congressional district will be able to render a verdict on Trump's record on popularity, high prices, $4 a gallon gas, and a war of choice in the Middle East. We'll look at how it's going for one Iowa Republican House member whose election is now a toss-up. That's next.
I'm feeling.
And the political stakes of 2026 look no further than Iowa. Because while Donald Trump won't be on the ballot, the consequences of his presidency absolutely will be. Republicans holding a narrow House majority are now tied to an administration whose policies are making life harder on the very issues voters care about most: gas prices, grocery bills, access to health care, and now Donald Trump's war in Iran with real impacts felt at home. Last month, Trump's war reached families in Iowa in a deeply personal way when 6 service members of a U.S. Army Reserve unit based in Des Moines were killed last month while deployed in Kuwait as Iran responded to attacks from the United States and Israel. Republican Zach Nunn represents Des Moines in Congress, and just 2 days after Trump's Iran war took the lives of 6 Americans, Congressman Nunn announced Pete Hegseth's appearance at a fundraiser event called Operation Top None. The New York Times later reported, quote, several Republicans declined to comment on whether the defense secretary should be fundraising during an ongoing military conflict in the Middle East that has so far killed 6 U.S. troops and injured others. But Democrats said the event was inappropriate. Following the backlash, Zach Nunn postponed the event. And that is the backdrop against which Iowa voters will get to choose in November who will represent them in the 3rd Congressional District, a district where Republican Zach Nunn won by just 4 points in the 2024 election. Our next guest, Democratic State Senator Sarah Trone Garriott, is running against the Trump-endorsed Zach Nunn. On the day Trump launched his war on Iran, State Senator Garriott posted, quote, Iowans don't want another forever war. And that sentiment is now part of a broader moral debate. The Wall Street Journal reports, quote, President Trump earlier this week said he believed God is on his side in the war, quote, because God is good. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, an evangelical Christian, has used religious rhetoric throughout the war, saying on Wednesday that the war effort was, quote, carried out under the protection of divine providence. He drew parallels between the resurrection of Christ and the survival and rescue of a U.S. pilot from Iranian territory on Easter Sunday. And today, without naming Donald Trump or Pete Hegseth, Pope Leo XIV posted, quote, God does not bless any conflict. Anyone who is a disciple of Christ, the Prince of Peace, is never on the side of those who once wielded the sword and today drop bombs. Joining us now is State Senator Sarah Trone Garriott of Iowa. She is a Lutheran minister and the Democratic candidate for Iowa's 3rd Congressional District. Senator, thank you very much for being here. Tell us about your district and about what you're hearing about the Iran war.
Well, I'm running for Congress because Iowans deserve someone who's going to make their life better. And that's the work I've done throughout my life as a hospital chaplain, as a parish pastor, as a state senator. But my opponent, Zach Nunn, has done things to hurt my neighbors. He voted to cut Medicaid, which is already closing our rural hospitals and clinics. He said he wants the ACA gone, which is going to eliminate protections for pre-existing conditions, which is going to really impact cancer survivors like my mother. And he is supporting the reckless tariffs 100%. And they've been devastating for our farm economy, but they're raising the prices on everything for everyone. And Trump's war in Iran now is just the next piece of this. It's making a bad situation even worse. We're seeing prices go up at the gas pump, fertilizers rising. It's increased substantially right before spring planting. And then we have that very deep and very real hurt of losing two service members from my district. So just down the street from where I live. And that's hurting Iowans. Iowans know they deserve better. And that's why my campaign has had such amazing grassroots support. That's why this is a toss-up seat, because people deserve better. And so if the folks watching at home would like to learn more about my campaign, visit sarahforiowa.com.
You mentioned in your response a moment ago about rising healthcare costs. After voting for Donald Trump's cuts to Medicaid, Congressman Zach Nunn said, and I'm quoting here, "I think the myth here is that rural hospitals are going to close down." Senator Garrett, has that proven true?
It's not a myth. It's already happening. The cuts are going to be pretty significant for Iowa because about 20% of Iowans depend on Medicaid for their health insurance. About 40% of kids and 40% of births are paid for by Medicaid. And so that's a huge piece for hospitals. And if they can't make ends meet, they're going to have to close their doors. And that's impacting healthcare for people all throughout the state, whether they're on Medicaid or not. We're already seeing the cuts having an impact on rural clinics. We're seeing layoffs in our metro areas. And it's just the beginning.
You know, Michigan Senator Alyssa Slotkin joined you for a town hall this week. What were the biggest concerns you heard?
People came to share their stories. You know, Iowans really deserve elected leaders who are going to show up for them and listen. My opponent, Zach Nunn, has never held a town hall in the 4 years that he served. But for me, showing up is a huge part of what I do. As a hospital chaplain, that was the main piece of my work, was being present. As a pastor, I used to take the church directory and go visit everybody in that community where they lived, because that's how you get to know the people in the community. And so town halls for me are a way to show up and give the folks access to their elected leaders. It meant a lot to have Senator Slotkin come to town, because we don't have anyone in Washington representing Iowa who's going to do that, who's going to show up for the people. Senator Slotkin knows that the road to flipping the House runs through my district.
You are a minister. Trump threatened to wipe out a civilization the day after Easter. Do you sense any uncomfortability among Trump supporters about the president saying that?
My faith calls me to love my neighbors, and that is hard to do sometimes, but my faith gives me the courage and the encouragement to do that. And the week before Easter, I went from faith community to faith community here through Holy Week, visiting with people. And I can see the love, the compassion, the kindness that are in the hearts of Iowans, how much they care for their neighbors, how hard they work. And the president's comments really do not reflect our values. They do not align with where the people of Iowa are at. It was pretty shocking.
Iowa congressional candidate, Iowa State Senator Sarah Trone Garrett, thank you very much for coming to The Last Word. Good luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you so much.
And coming up, Trump lied about lowering prices during the 2024 campaign, and now Americans are paying the price. Inflation surging, sky-high gas prices,